Okay, we'll start with a roll call. Christy? Carl?
Here.
Kate?
Here.
Andrea?
Here.
All right, and myself, Jordan is here, and co-chair Megan.
Here.
Okay. All right, we'll start with approval of minutes. Did everybody have a chance to look over the minutes from our January meeting?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I will entertain a motion to approve.
I'll put in a motion to approve, Andrea.
This is Carl. I'll second.
Okay, we've had a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, and all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And all those opposed say nay. Okay, motion passes.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda is an update of the federal facility agreement. I do not see our office counsel representation on the line right now. They might be running a little bit late. So if it's amenable to the board, I would ask that we just move this down maybe to the end of our regular agenda items so we could talk about it after the USACE project update.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I see a thumbs up from Kate.
All right,
And that
great.
works for me as well.
All right, great. Thanks. I'll appreciate your flexibility on that. And we can move right along to do new business.
Okay, we have 3 new possible RAB members. We have previously discussed and done a committee review of Mitch and Jennifer, and we have a brand new request from I believe it's Asa Leckie. He is the Commission 3 representative for Skamania County. I wanted to ask the board if they wanted to do an official vote on all 3 of them, or would like to do more due diligence on Asa's application.
I wouldn't mind, this is Kate, sorry. I wouldn't mind getting some additional details to the questions from Asa. But
Okay.
not the voting on the other members either, or the other applications.
Okay.
I don't see Asa online, but if the members would like to email me their questions, I can reach out to Asa with the compilation of those.
I think we were just hoping I don't want to speak for everyone, but I think we were hoping they might elaborate their answers a little further.
Okay.
Yeah, that was my feeling is I didn't have a problem with what you said. It just really gave no information as to, it was just very general.
All right, I will make a note to reach out.
Okay.
I think maybe we're just looking for maybe some specific examples.
Okay.
Yeah, or just maybe just a little elaboration on for me would be fine. Is like, if he had any specific interests or, Jordan, thanks for sending out the link to his commissioner page bio, but yeah, just, I wouldn't mind just a little more information on his interests. And
Sure.
Okay. Carl, did you have any specific questions you wanted asked?
No, I don't. Not at this point.
Okay. And I don't have anything specific as well. Okay, we can move on to the other 2 applicants. So we've already done reviews of them. I will entertain motions to approve them individually or together.
I think we should let's do one at a time.
Okay.
I'll put forward a motion to accept Mitch as a new RAB member.
I'll second. This is Carl.
All right, we have a first and a second to appoint Mitch as a RAB member. Any discussion? Okay, I would actually like to do a roll call vote on these for any appointments to the board. So Carl?
Yes, aye.
Aye. Okay. Andrea?
Aye.
Kate?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. So Mitch is now officially appointed to the RAB board. Megan, will you be sending out official letters of appointment?
Yeah, I will contact any voted in RAB members.
Okay.
Well, I'll
thank you.
contact all of them, but
Yeah.
I will certainly let those that are voted in know about the appointment.
Okay, thank you. I'll entertain a motion to appoint Jennifer.
I will second that motion. This is Andrea.
Oh, I need a first.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll put forward a motion to nominate Jennifer.
And I will second again. This is Carl.
All right, we have a first and a second to appoint Jennifer to the RAB. Any further discussion? All right, not hearing any, we'll move to a roll call vote. Carl?
Aye.
Andrea?
Aye.
Kate?
Can I abstain?
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. Okay, and I vote yes. So motion passes. Okay, we will now move on to USACE project update.
Okay, well, it's a busy time for the Corps right now. We are providing responses to comments, or we're providing responses for regulator and tribal responses to comments, and providing some revisions on the Phase 1 River Operable Unit Work Plan. The back check is pretty much complete as of this point. We had gotten some additional comments and are working through those. Final revisions are underway, and we're also in the midst of preparing for the field work that this work plan covers. To date, we have gotten a conditional approval from EPA on that work plan. There are a few remaining comments to address from them so we can start the work properly in the field. We will be taking care of those. There are some comments that we are actually not going to be able to get to. We had a couple comments that we're still just working to resolve at this time. And some comments that we're just not able to cover under this particular phase of the river work plan. We are going to continue discussing and working to resolve those items as we move into the Phase 2 development. And all those kind of decisions will be documented in the administrative record. I do see Kate's hand up. Kate, please go ahead.
Thanks, Megan. I see that we have some new folks joining us from the public today, and thanks to those folks for being here. I wonder if you could just do a quick explanation of the river operable unit versus the upland operable unit for folks who are new. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely, and great request. So we are working towards conducting some sampling of the river area. We refer to the river area as an operable unit. It's basically a geographic location that's been decided as an affected area of contamination from Bradford Island. This particular work plan, we will be going out and doing some sediment sampling. There'll be quite a bit of sediment sampling conducted on the north side of Bradford Island, moving into the forebay north of the island. There's also going to be some current meters placed that will do some testing over a period of time for us. There's also going to be some sediment traps placed out. Those sediment traps will collect sediment, and then we'll be able to do some testing on those. It'll help us kind of determine an overall picture of, well, it'll give us some evidence towards working on the area and the extent of the contamination. And it'll also give us some more information about how the river moves and how sediment moves within the river. I will open it up real quick to our program manager, Jackie. Jackie, is there anything you would want to add to that statement?
Yeah, so the other operable unit we have is the upland, which is the kind of island proper, and those will be separate discussions. And then with the river, like I said, we kind of have it split phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1, we've got it kind of constraints, and it's very kind of very focused effort. And then we have phase 2, which has not been fully developed, and that's one thing that is part of our update. One of our contractors is working on. So I think that's kind of in general. I would say the other thing is that when we say operable unit, those are kind of estimated boundaries as we develop the project. Those boundaries could change. That's just kind of at this point what is understood, but those aren't like finite boundaries by any means. If there's anybody that is wanting additional information, we can, we've done some presentations in the past with a little more detail. I'm happy to point those out for those folks if they'd like a little bit more information and a little more detail.
Mm-hmm. All right, thanks, Jackie. So like Jackie said, we do have some work also going on for a phase 2 of that river operable unit, as well as developing proposed work for the upland operable unit as well. Those are in development right now. And these, the work plans that we are moving towards, and also the sampling, those are our main objectives right now. We do have other things going on in the background while we are prioritizing particularly the phase 1 river work plan and the sampling effort. We also have visitor center displays that are being drafted right now. We're hoping to see some mock-ups, getting just a quick internal review of those first with our contractor, hopefully by the end of the month or sometime into March. And we've also been working the community involvement plan. There's not too much of a update on this one at this moment. Like I said, we have been have our hands quite full with the technical work at this moment, and we've been prioritizing a lot of our manpower towards that work plan and towards the sampling. But the overall state of the community involvement plan is that we've gotten some initial comments from some regulators and from some community groups, and we are incorporating those comments for those folks. So we're working towards developing the response to those comments so we can have those comments fact checked. And there is a little bit of additional review that we'd like to conduct for anyone that is mentioned specifically in that community involvement plan. Kate.
Hey, thanks, Megan. I don't know if this requires a motion or not, but I'd like to put forward that we include folks from Yakima Nation Fisheries to give feedback on those draft exhibits, since a lot of that initial recommendations came from them.
On the visitor center displays, yeah, I think that's a great idea overall. I think it would actually be great for regulators and tribes to be given an opportunity to take a look at those. That's a request. The visitor center displays for anyone who's new to this meeting are requests put out by the Restoration Advisory Board. And so they're generally meant for public engagement. But we can definitely get a lot of great feedback from tribes and from EPA in the states on those as well.
Yeah, and we definitely, again, we've kind of discussed before in previous ones that, you know, we may be we are kind of limited with the amount of information that we're able to put, and so we're going to be, you know, trying to put forth with kind of this snapshot. So, you know, if there's information that we, you know, aren't able to incorporate, we're going to be responding to that and kind of going through that explanation of why we're not able to incorporate those comments. So we will be responding to kind of those suggestions and kind of going through that rationale. So we want to go through kind of the internal process first to kind of help narrow it down, but then we'll include parties that have provided input, as well as tribes and regulators.
Yeah, and I think at some point we talked about approaching the visitor centers if we need to add an additional one of the stand-up banners. So maybe we'll see where we land, and if we need to circle back with the visitor centers to accommodate more space, then we can do that too.
Yeah, and I see a comment from David for OHA. You know, our plan is as far as the fish advisory is part of the displays. We looked into ones that like hold, you know, for flyers or brochures so that we can display the fish advisory information, as well as the project site information.
And to add a little more detail to that, the fish advisories would be printouts that visitors could take with them if they wanted to. And we'd also include a QR code so that they could see any additional languages that are provided on OHA's fish advisory website, as well as any additional information that's there for them. All right, I'm gonna briefly pause here for any other questions or comments from our RAB members. Okay, I'll open it up for any comments from other public members. All right, not seeing any hands, so I would like to move on to talking about the federal facility agreement. And I think I have seen our Office of Counsel join us. Jeff, do I still have you on the line?
Yeah, I'm here, Megan. Can you hear me all right?
Yep, loud and clear. Thank you.
Yeah, I think good news to report overall. We were able to kind of at that DC level, kind of break through an impasse on language that relates to the Corps of Engineers Civil Works budget. And I'm pretty sure I've heard from council representing DEQ, ecology, and EPA, and we also had some involvement from Department of Justice and Office of Management and Budget, and everyone appreciates the language. I think right now we are kind of preparing to try to route the FFA, figuring out the sequence for signing it. The federal facility agreement, it's an interagency agreement, an enforceable tool that EPA can use to, you know, enforce penalties, but it's kind of a novel agreement in as much as it's actually signed by agency officials, and then it goes out for public review and comment before, if any tweaks are made to it, before it becomes effective. So the fact that it's the FFA parties are figuring out how to sign it and then take kind of public review and comment, I realize that's very odd and unusual. Usually federal agencies take public review and comment and then sign documents, but that's just the nature of this beast. And Megan, I think if you want to share, there looks like there's one date that will be modified, in the site management plan portion of the FFA that I think has received some support, but there is one date that might be changed in the SMP if you want to talk to that.
Sorry for the delay there, a little computer glitch. So I can't say too much about the SMP date. We had a near-term date for the Phase 2 River OU work plan. The plan dates of those have changed around, kind of based on discussions that we have had with tribes and EPA and the states on kind of how to handle the Phase 1 versus the Phase 2 work. So the initial submission of that work plan date, we have recommended that the date shift. We did get some positive feedback from EPA in support of that, but I don't believe at this time.
And ODQ.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Jackie. I think we haven't gotten feedback from Washington, so I mean, you know, we still need to go through that particular process. But I think that's about all there is to say on that particular date at this moment.
Yeah, that's all I had, Megan.
Great. Do we have any questions from the RAB regarding federal facility agreement?
So it sounds like what I'm hearing, Jeff, is that the agreement has been reached. Is that correct? The issue with the budget language has been since resolved.
Yeah. I think the representatives that are the representatives of the FFA parties that are negotiating the agreement have all indicated that the language is acceptable. It still kind of has to be formally routed for signature to kind of the agency management or leadership level. You know, there's always an outside chance that a decision maker at the FFA parties might have a last minute concern, but I know that counsel for each of the FFA parties have been keeping, you know, their management and their leadership apprised. So I'm pretty sure that yeah, we're really close to finalizing and getting those officials to sign it.
Great. And at what point do the tribes, Yakima and Cowlitz, who have MOUs get to like, do they have an opportunity to give feedback prior to the public?
Yeah, I think that's being worked out right now. Such a kind of significant development as an FFA going into effect. USACE and EPA, in support of the federal trust responsibility, will be offering and inviting each of the interested tribes to engage in formal nation-to-nation, government-to-government consultation on the FFA itself. My sense is that would be in parallel, yet separate from the public review and comment. It's nation-to-nation consultation is not public review and comment. We're tracking that, but temporally or schedule-wise, I think, you know, speaking only for the Corps of Engineers, I think our leadership wants to make themselves available to leadership from each of the tribal nations at approximately the same time as the FFA is kind of out and available for folks to review.
So the tribes that have MOUs are not going to have the opportunity to provide feedback prior to the signing of the FFA.
I think that's kind of the direction we're going. There's going to be kind of agency signatures, and I'm only speaking for the Corps of Engineers, but I'm pretty sure that our agency official would sign it and then take into account, you know, any comments or any dialogue that comes up or concerns from tribal nations during the consultation period. And then in parallel, management and staff from the Corps of Engineers would also be fielding questions from the public or comments after I think the federal facility agreement is actually made available in the Federal Register is where it's published. But the tribal consultation will be a separate process. There might be, Rich could probably speak maybe to his agency's sequencing to the extent it might be different than USACE's.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak a little bit to that. Excuse me. We've had, we've presented a couple of options for this. This is the first federal facility that's been signed in this area in a very long time, and in the nation in over 13, 14 years. And with the tribal interests, it creates another added layer to that. So some of the options that we were exploring is to extend there's a mandatory 15-day hold time from the moment from signature date to releasing to the public for comment. We have suggested extending that to 30 days and allowing the tribes the opportunity within that 30-day period to have consultation, as well as releasing or sending invitation to consultation letters early before we actually get the signature dates. If we are unable to release the FFA in a signed version or an unsigned version, then we can at least start the scheduling early on. And there are a couple of other slight variations to that we've kind of been exploring, but we're looking to get buy-off from the state agencies and from Army Corps of Engineers on that as well. Go ahead, Jeff, please.
Oh, thanks, Rich. I just totally blanked. I forgot about that 15-day, that period that might be extended. I wanted to make clear that USACE is also amenable. I think given the number of tribes that are interested in this site, I think just kind of practically we're wrestling with whether we could squeeze in robust, meaningful tribal consultation in that period. But Rich, thanks for bringing that up. I forgot that USACE is also interested in whether or not we can squeeze in meaningful consultation as well before it's released in the Federal Register. But yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And like and just as Jeff said, if it happens to be where we're taking comments from the tribes as well as taking in public comments, it's really, as Jeff said, a scheduling issue. Just the number of people that we would have to work on these things, and it wouldn't be because we're trying to squeeze them all together into one package. We do consider them separate.
Thank you. I just also want to acknowledge to folks who are members of the public that we're using a ton of acronyms as we're talking. So if anybody doesn't know what an acronym means, feel free to put that question in the chat. I think the chat's open, Megan. I just want folks to know they can ask those questions.
Oh, I apologize. Am I guilty of that?
Oh, no,
I try not to.
I've been meaning to say that for a while. It wasn't just you.
No, Kate, though, but you bring up a good point. Would it be helpful sometimes even for like internally, like when we get someone new, we've got like kind of a common acronym list to kind of like have for someone for reference? Would that be helpful?
I think so.
To folks?
We could pop chat every time we have a meeting and then folks have something to look at.
Yeah, so Core will take that as an action item. We'll kind of try to go through kind of like our commonly used acronyms and have something we can send out for people to reference.
Thanks. That's really helpful, Jackie.
Hey, and speaking of acronyms, we also got a question from Dina Horton asking if the public will get to comment on the community involvement plan. Jackie, could you speak to that, please?
Yeah. So we weren't planning on the public reviewing the community involvement plan, only because the public was interviewed, that the interview process that kind of informs and develops the community involvement plan. That's kind of that step. And then what we've been doing is folks that are mentioned as far as, they're called out like with coordination or things like that. We're having those parties to ensure that they have reviews, but that was kind of the rationale for why we weren't necessarily putting it out for like public comment. Jeff, you have your hand up.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Jackie. I would just add that the community involvement plan, I think the Corps understands it's been a long time in development. We engaged in community involvement, questionnaires, surveys, and interviews with a lot of the affected public and interested public. And my understanding is the community involvement plan is supposed to be a living, breathing document that is revised over time as the site moves through the CERCLA process and we get closer to a cleanup. And there may be different pockets of the community that may have a stronger interest as the site kind of moves through that process. And so this is really, I just wanted to emphasize that, Jackie, like you said, this is kind of the current update. The Corps has a continuing obligation to make sure that it's providing for updated community involvement, and so there's no reason that the Corps would not continue to update that document if, for example, Pacific Northwest Waterways Association or another interested member of the community or trade association said like, hey, this is completely silent as to my constituency. Corps of Engineers, why aren't you listening to so-and-so? That might be reason enough to update it another time. So again, it is kind of supposed to be a living, breathing document that's revisited over time.
Yeah, and I would say again, the RAB kind of helps us also kind of have the pulse on, again, community needs as far as community involvement, and if that shifts significantly from what we currently have documented, that might also trigger that as well. So it's one of those where we have it, but we do have to kind of identify as we see the needs change and when an update might be necessary.
Mhm. All right. Yeah, appreciate those inputs, Jackie and Jeff, and for being able to take a quick step back to answer that question. If there are no other questions regarding the USACE project status or the federal facility agreement, we could start to talk about additional RAB meetings or upcoming RAB meetings. Just a quick note that we do have 2 other agenda items on the docket tonight, and our big one is the USGS study presentation. So we want to leave plenty of room for that.
Okay, so as of right now, we have next month scheduled for March 12th virtual only. As a board, we have not determined any future meetings from there. I think the consensus has been to continue the monthly meetings. Is there any opposition to that from the members present?
No. That was Kate.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Okay, I'm fine with monthly as well till we kind of get a rhythm going and have a full board in place. How about format? I think probably, I would like to see when we finally do get a draft of the display, I'd like to see it in person if that's even possible. But I'm fine virtual for now. I don't know how anybody else feels.
Just to clarify, for when we bring in mock-ups for the displays, well, I guess I can talk to our contractor about whether something like a paper copy, like a paper mock-up would be available. But I had been just planning on like an electronic version for folks to review. To clarify the request, is it to try to see something physical in person?
I would like to. I guess you can tell me dimensions all you want, but I'm not going to understand it till I actually see it in person, until I'm standing next to it. So maybe one of them fancy printers and print out a full scale version of it, if that's even possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me take that away as a conversation to have with Jacobs, and they can give me some information about the art of the possible for that, to see what kind of physical mock-up might be conceivable to bring in.
Okay. Any other input on future meetings?
This is Kate. I think there may be some meeting agendas that are more conducive to meeting in person than others. So it's kind of, I think, hard to predict necessarily how that'll go. I'm not opposed to virtual meetings, particularly for the purpose of saving resources. I know some folks have to fly in sometimes and get hotels. But I do also recognize the importance of meeting in person. So I think we should plan to meet in person, maybe at least like once a quarter. So that we have that opportunity for folks to be in person. I don't know. That's just a thought, but maybe something along those lines where we don't have to always meet in person, but making that available several times a year so that folks can get together.
I'll add that I have gotten feedback that some folks are just unable to attend online. So there is an accessibility issue for some folks to attend virtually.
Yeah, then I would definitely consider having more in-person meetings if folks can't attend online.
Yeah, it's not particularly common. I think I've received that comment once or twice though.
Yeah, I mean, if there's folks expressing interest in showing up, then yeah.
Yep. Would one of the members like to make a motion about whether to have the April meeting virtual or in person? We can also wait to have that vote on the March meeting.
Quick question from Andrea.
Yes.
On the in-person meetings, will there still be the virtual, correct?
Oh, yes. We will always have a virtual option regardless.
Okay.
Yeah, that accessibility issue goes both ways. Some folks, accessibility is very important to have virtual, and for other folks, accessibility is difficult virtual. So virtual will always be available.
Thank you.
I like the idea of having it in person in April. I mean, if our goal is to meet at least once per quarter in person, we've already missed it for this first quarter of the year. I don't know how anybody else feels.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think our concerns were for inclement weather, and I think that hopefully has passed, although maybe not this week, but by the time our next meeting out.
I hope by April it's gone.
Yeah.
Well, following the monthly drumbeat, the next April meeting would be on the 9th of April. Jordan, would you like to present a motion for the date and the format?
Yeah, I will motion to hold the April meeting on Tuesday, April 12th, in person, in Cascade Locks.
I would second that if you amended to April 9th, I think is what Megan said.
Oh,
Yes.
sorry. I pulled up the calendar with the wrong day. Yes, April 9th. Sorry.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, the motion passes. Thank you. And that will be an in-person. There will be a virtual component, just to clarify. Okay, we can move on to our special presentation for the evening. This presentation was a request from the RAB as well. There were some studies released by the USGS, US Geological Survey, regarding movement of smallmouth bass near the Bonneville Dam. I believe these studies came out. I'll let the author speak to the actual dates and everything of those studies. But it came up as a matter of interest in the last couple of months from the RAB and also from other interested parties, tribes, EPA in the States. So we were able to get the author to come in and talk about those studies. At the conclusion of Mr. Cox's presentation, we also have OHA available to do a quick overview of the Bonneville Fish Advisory. We have discussed that at the RAB before, but given that we're talking about fish movement, we thought it would be prudent to do a quick review of that advisory again. So now I will hand it over to Mr. Toby Cock.
Okay, thanks, Megan. Can you give me the controls to share my screen?
Kelly, do we have availability to do that under this system? I'm really not familiar with the technical side of that.
Yeah, that or we may just have you just say, next slide, and then we can have Jacobs move through the slide deck for you.
I think I did that, Toby. Did you see if it came up for you?
Let's see. It says control slides.
There you go.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, all right. That'll work. All right. Well,
Perfect.
Thanks. All right. Well, thanks for the invite. I'm happy to be here. As Megan said, my name's Toby Cook. I'm a research fish biologist with USGS. Our office is right here in the gorge, so we're in close proximity to Bonneville Dam. And I'm going to be talking about two studies that were conducted. Specifically, they were acoustic telemetry studies where we were evaluating movement of smallmouth bass. And so my picture is a little bit grainy here, but I think you can see the screenshots from our reports okay. At the bottom of each of these images is the DOI numbers, so you can go to those DOI numbers and actually pull up these reports and look at the results for yourself. You'll notice that the report on the left shows that the first study was conducted during August to December 2020, and the report on the right was conducted during March to October 2022. And so in 2020, we were primarily working in the fall. Biologically speaking, you'd expect smallmouth bass as water temperatures are decreasing and flows are relatively low. You would expect smallmouth bass to be decreasing their activity and moving into habitats where they would overwinter. Conversely, for the spring study that was primarily done in spring and summer of 22, as water temperatures are coming up and flows are picking up, you'd expect smallmouth bass to be becoming more active and expanding their range, moving out for spawning and things like that. And so this schematic here shows the forebay of Bonneville Dam, the larger Google Earth image in the center of the screen. Just real quick, Megan, here, you probably can't see my pointer, right? So I'm moving it on my screen, but I don't think you guys will be able to see it.
No, unfortunately, we cannot see your pointer.
Okay, I'll do this verbally then. So the yellow circles on the larger image here are the 15 locations where we had acoustic telemetry receivers deployed. So these are places where we were listening for tagged fish. The yellow dashed lines that you can see immediately downstream and immediately upstream of those receivers. Yeah, perfect. Those are areas where, once fish move downstream of about that location or upstream of the upper bounds, we would lose contact with fish. We wouldn't know what they're doing beyond that point. And so for reference, that upper bounds is about 1 mile upstream of the dam. The receivers in the larger picture were deployed in identical locations for 2020 and 2022. The image in the bottom right, based on some results we collected in 2020, we recommended putting arrays upstream and downstream of the dam. And so you can see that we had receivers on the Oregon and Washington shore, or the right bank and the left bank, looking downstream, about 5 miles upstream and downstream of the dam, about 10 miles upstream of the dam, and about 15 miles upstream of the dam. And so those, we'll talk more about detections on those arrays as we progress here. So this slide shows locations where fish were collected in red for 2020. You can see that we tagged a total of 40 smallmouth bass during 2020. And in yellow, the fish locations for 2022, we tagged a total of 41 fish. Both studies were conducted the same in that we would go out and angle for smallmouth bass. When we would caught a fish, we would record its location on a GPS. We would take the fish over to the tagging boat. They would tag it, and then we would navigate back to the exact location where we caught it and release it. So basically, fish were collected and then re-released at the same location. My slide stack kind of walks through each of these individually, but this is fine. We'll focus on the top slide stack. So these are the first set of results. Both of these are from the 2022 study. In the two reports that I showed at the start of this presentation, we have these types of schematics for each of the different release locations. So you can go back and review all of those. I just want to focus on two just to give you an appreciation for the information that's available. And so in 2022, if we look at the top graph, the red squares that are located on the south side of Bradford Island are locations for 28 smallmouth bass that were collected, tagged, and released. And then the other colored circles that you see around the forebay, again, are those receiver locations that I showed in a previous slide. And the information at each of those locations is shown for colors. So that at the legend at the top right of that figure, you can see number of fish ranges from about 28 fish, which is bright yellow, down to less than 5, which is purple. As you move down through the color scheme there, kind of the middle range from about 10 to 20 fish are in the blues and greens. And so if you look at the number of fish detected at locations away from where fish were tagged and released, you can see that the farther you move upstream away from the release site, you kind of move through that middle bounds where you see, 10, 15 fish detected. And then once you get up to the upstream end of the array, farthest away from the dam, you can see that 5 or less fish were detected up there. The other thing is the size of these circles represents the approximate duration of time that tagged fish were detected in these locations. So you can see that the two large yellow spheres near where the fish were tagged and released, fish predominantly spent their time during the study very close to where they were tagged and released. And then again, as you move farther upstream away from that location, they spent less and less time at those locations. If you look down at the bottom plot there, same information. This is for 9 fish that were tagged and released on Goose Island on the left, or the Oregon shore, left bank. And again, you can see the same relationship. The fish tended to spend the most amount of time, and the greatest number of fish were detected near where they were released. And then as you move farther away from those sites, both duration and numbers of fish decreased. And so this was a common trend regardless of where fish were released. And again, I'd reference you to the reports if you want to see other locations. We did see, though, that as the study progressed, that fish tended to leave the forebay area or our telemetry array. And for 2020, we had 36 fish, 36 of the 40 fish that were tagged, provided meaningful detection. So we had detection histories that ranged from a couple weeks to a couple months for each of these 36 fish. At the end of the study, when we pulled all the receivers at the end of 2020, 13 of the 36 fish had moved downstream of our detection array. So again, downstream of those dashed lines that appear in this figure, and 9 fish had moved upstream of our array. We did not have detectors upstream or downstream of the forebay in 2020, so we don't know, we don't know much about where those fish went. So basically that left about 40% of the fish were still remaining in our array at the end of the study for 2020. If we look at the same information for 2022, you can see that 39 of the 41 fish provided meaningful detections. And again, similar relationship, 17 of the fish were last detected moving downstream and out of the array. 10 fish were last detected moving upstream and out of the array, and only about 12 fish remained in the array. So, there's definitely, over the course of time, fish definitely tended to move out of the study area. So we're going to talk about the 2022 detections here, because again, we had these arrays located 5, 10, and 15 miles upstream of the dam. And so the cluster of yellow spheres in the center of the diagram where the B is located, that's the forebay of Bonneville Dam. And you can see that we had a total of 10 fish moved upstream away from Bonneville Dam. 7 of those were detected upstream as far as Stevenson. That's about where the downstream location's at. 1 fish was detected approximately 10 miles upstream, and 2 fish moved upstream as far as the 15-mile mark. If we look at the downstream side of the dam, you can see that 5 fish were detected on gates down there. 3 fish were detected as far downstream as 5 miles below the dam, and 2 fish were detected as far downstream as 15 miles, or about 15 miles below the dam. The interesting thing for both of these groups of fish is that 2 of the 5 fish that passed downstream of Bonneville Dam eventually moved upstream through the dam and re-entered the forebay, and 5 of the 10 fish that were detected upstream on the upstream arrays eventually moved back down to the Bonneville forebay. Additionally, 1 of the 2020 fish was recovered. I think that's about 11 or 12 miles upstream of the dam, and that tag was reported to us as well. So a little bit of evidence, for some pretty substantial movements from the 2020 fish as well. Again, we're looking at 2022 data here only. Just to orient you with what you're seeing here, the big black line in the middle is flow at Bonneville Dam during our study period. So basically from late March to the end of October 2022. The red vertical lines at the bottom of the graph and the gray vertical lines at the bottom of the graph, that refers to fish movements downstream of the dam, and the blue and gray and pink lines located at the top of the graph are fish movements upstream of the dam. You can see, if we focus on the downstream fish first, at the bottom, you can see that the 5 fish moved downstream from late April to late May. And then the 2 fish that moved back upstream and were detected in our array did so in late August and early September. If you look up at the top of the graph, you can see that fish, made pretty substantial movements, primarily during May and June, but we also had 1 fish that moved upstream in September. You can see fish returned back downstream in July and August. And then some fish, the pink vertical lines at the far right, actually made a secondary upstream trip and went 5, 10, or 15 miles upstream of the dam. So evidence for some pretty substantial movements by these tagged fish. We want to look a little bit to see, was there any evidence that fish size influenced migration, substantial differences away from the forebay? So the top figure here is for no. Those are fish that were not detected substantial distances. The bottom is for fish that, yes, were detected substantial differences. And, not a lot of evidence here that there's a big size difference. Obviously, the migrating fish at the bottom panel, we don't see fish up in that larger size category from 375 to 425 millimeters, but we only saw 3 fish in the overall tag population. So pretty small sample sizes, can't say a whole lot, about this in terms of fish size. And so just some of the key takeaways, if we kind of walk through some bullet points here, I think both studies showed evidence for strong site fidelity by smallmouth bass in 2020 and 2022. I think, again, that's based on the residence time, the amount of time fish spent near where they were collected, tagged, and released, and both, as well as the number of fish. We just did not see the large numbers of fish dispersing substantially far away from where they were collected. But however, many tagged fish did move away from the forebay over time, and 61% were detected outside of the array at the end of the 2020 study. Just a note here, that 75% should actually be 69%. That was a typo I caught here a few minutes before the presentation. So about 60 to 70% of the fish in both studies ended up leaving our array, our detection array. But I also want to point out that seasonal movements of pretty significant magnitudes are very common for smallmouth bass. And so I'm going to show you just a couple snippets from some previous studies. This is one conducted in late 1980s in Wisconsin from the Embarrass and Wolf Rivers. And I highlighted a couple key points here. So smallmouth bass of age 2 or older migrated out of the Embarrass River downstream 69 to 87 kilometers to the Wolf River when temperatures fell below 16 degrees in the fall. Most of those individuals later returned back up that same 69 to 87 mile reach and were located within 5 kilometers of where they were originally tagged and released the following spring. The second study is from McClure et al. In 2020. This was a Snake River study. I highlighted right above the highlight in the middle of the paragraph. You can see that they tagged 149 smallmouth bass that were tagged and released in the study. 107 were relocated at least one time. About 80% of those fish had a maximum movement of 5 kilometers or greater, and about 43% of those fish moved 30 kilometers or greater. One of those fish moved 167 kilometers upstream. So again, just information to say this is not surprising, that some of the bass that we tagged moved pretty substantial distance away from the forebay. And again, I think our study, kind of the final conclusion here, is that we documented some fish moving at least 15 miles away from the forebay, and some of them later returned both from upstream and downstream. We certainly confirmed that smallmouth bass can move upstream at Bonneville Dam and re-enter the forebay. Again, some of those fish were detected at least 15 miles away. We don't know, how far those fish ultimately moved. We can just confirm that they were at least 15 miles away from where they were released. And so that is the last slide I have.
All right, thanks very much for that. I'd like to go ahead and move on to OHA's presentation before we open up for questions, as the fish consumption advisory is relevant to a lot of questions that folks have had. All right, so we're turning it over to OHA.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Okay, good. Yeah, so I'm David Fair. I'm a toxicologist with the Oregon Health Authority, and I have presented to the RAB before, but I think that some people are new that weren't here then. So I thought it would be good to just do a little bit of review of what our fish advisory is, and then my last couple of slides are about what questions Toby's study raises for the fish advisory and how we're thinking about that. So the fish advisory, we have 2 fish advisories in the immediate area there. So there's the Bonneville Dam one and the Middle Columbia advisory. So can you go to the next slide? Yeah, so I like this map because you can see both of the advisories and how they fit together. So the big yellow line in the middle is the Middle Columbia advisory, and it's long. It's like 150 miles, and it starts from where the Bonneville Dam advisory drops off and continues all the way up to McNary Dam. And the fish there are cleaner. Like, we have data showing that those fish are substantially cleaner than the ones close up to the dam. And so, because of that, the fish advisory is more allows for more consumption of fish because there's less contaminant. So you can safely eat more fish from that larger area. And then on the very left side of the slide, you can see the little red spot, and that's a much smaller area. That's the area of the Bonneville Dam advisory, and that just goes from the dam itself upstream about a mile to the same place where Toby's kind of array ended in 2020. So that's kind of the area of these 2 advisories. So if you could go to the next slide. Yeah, so we've known about the contamination in the fish in the forebay up close to the dam for quite a while. So our fish advisory there we issued it in 2013. So it's been in place for a while, and the dots that you see on this map are where smallmouth bass were caught in 2011 for the sampling that supports the 2013 advisories. They were caught in 2011. We got the data for them, I think, in 2012, and then we issued the advisory in 2013, if I remember the sequence right. And we used all of those fish. The color coding for this doesn't really matter because we used all of those fish of all the different colors when we were calculating the advisory, the meal recommendations. Oh, one thing I should say, I meant to say this at the beginning, but I know there's some people there's a lot of different opinions and feelings about fish advisories out there, kind of the philosophy behind them. And I do just want to, I always like to say that our goal is not to have fish advisories, right? The goal is that it would be better to have clean fish. So we support EPA and the Army Corps' work towards that end of having cleaner fish, so that even if some advisory is still necessary in the future, hopefully it could be a much less restrictive one where people can eat some of the fish at least. So just wanted to say that before I went further. So again, the Bonneville Dam Advisory is based on a fish tissue data of PCBs from this area on the map that you see there. Okay, next slide. And this is our new sign. We've been able to update it, and we're working with the Corps to get it produced and printed and put out there, so we can raise awareness of this advisory. And so maybe I'll start in that kind of bottom right corner. That's the map. Like, the important things about a fish advisory are, where is it? Like, what area does it apply to? And so that's what this map shows you. And again, that shows you it kind of ends at Ruckle Creek, where that comes in, and kind of at Fort Rains on the Washington side is about where it ends. And the big red square on the sort of the upper left there those are a lot of examples of resident fish species. And when we say resident, that just means ones that don't like go out to the ocean and then come back on a seasonal basis. As we've just heard from Toby, like, some of these ones that we call resident fish move more than I knew that they did, but they don't move all the way to the ocean and come back like salmon and shad and steelhead do. So our advice for this advisory is no consumption of resident fish, because those fish up close to the dam they have pretty high PCB levels. So we don't recommend that people eat any of those resident species of fish from that area on the map there. We do like to steer people towards migratory fish like salmon, shad, and steelhead, because they do spend a lot of time away from contaminated source areas, and they're much cleaner. So we call them a good healthy choice that we like to steer people towards. And then on the bottom there, in the little orange rectangle, we do have kind of a special case. This is for lamprey. And lamprey are migratory like salmon and shad and steelhead. They do go out to the ocean and spend a part of their life out there and then come back up the river to spawn the same way that salmon do. But because of the nature of their diet while they're out to sea, while they're adults, they're parasites on bigger fish. And so because of that, they kind of are like a top predator kind of situation, because they'll attach themselves to a big fish that may have a lot more contaminants, so they get a higher dose of contaminants from parasitizing that fish. So because of that, even though they're migratory, they're not as clean as the salmon and the shad and the steelhead. So we do have it's not a do not eat, but there is a limit. You can see there's 2 to 4 servings per month. And the 2 to 4 difference depends on who is eating the fish. So we have this split up into vulnerable groups, we call them, and kind of everyone else. And the vulnerable groups are people who are or may become pregnant and who are nursing, and young children under age 6. And because, and maybe this is a good time to go to the next slide. Actually, so we're most concerned about these groups because the effect of PCBs, the most sensitive effect of PCBs and mercury, which are in the fish, is that it can affect brain development. So young babies who are still developing in the womb, and also young babies who are nursing, and young children, their brains are still going through a lot of active development. And so if you have a chemical involved that is like impairing that development, it can be a big deal because it sort of can change the trajectory of development into the future, like into that child's, that can persist with that child into adulthood. And the types of changes I'm talking about are things that are kind of related, pretty similar to like ADHD and like attention deficit disorder. It's the impairments are with what's called executive function. Executive function is what we use to like to control impulses, to plan out a task. Like if you have a big job to do, executive function is what allows you to like break it up into smaller pieces and start and make a plan to do like one piece at a time. And those are the same kind of things that people who have ADHD really struggle with, the ability to have an impulse and stop it before that translates into a behavior. So that's what that's the health effect we're most concerned with. And that's why we're concerned about young kids getting exposed the most. Another problem for PCBs especially is that they build up in the fat of our bodies and they last with us for a very long time. So the PCBs that we consumed when we were young might still be with us today in our fat. And that's relevant to pregnancy and nursing, because during those phases, a woman has to mobilize a lot of energy from fat, and that fat goes into the milk and it goes in the placenta, and the PCBs go with it. So that's another reason why we consider those groups vulnerable to PCBs and to mercury. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is a transition away from the Bonneville Advisory to the Middle Columbia Advisory. And this is just an example of what I mean when I say that the fish are cleaner further upstream away from Bonneville Dam. So on this one, so the map again is to the left, and you can see this. Now we're talking about this big stretch of river, this 150-mile stretch from right where the Bonneville Advisory drops off and goes up to McNairy. And in the yellow, those are the same kinds of resident fish that were in the red box for Bonneville Dam. But because the area is cleaner, it's safe to eat more fish. So for this advisory, the recommendation is 1 meal a week, or 4 meals a month, which is the same. It's just however you want to break it up. So it's safe to eat up to 4 meals a month of those resident fish from this larger area because of the lower contaminant levels. You'll see that we still like to steer people towards the salmon, steelhead, and shad because they are the migratory and cleaner. And the lamprey advisory still applies to this area also because they cover the whole Columbia Basin. And the do not eat for the northern pike minnow is mostly because the Washington state has a do not eat advisory that's statewide for northern pike minnow. So because this is a joint advisory with Washington, we just applied their statewide do not eat advisory to the northern pike minnow here too. Okay, next slide. When we talk about meals, like how many meals per month we recommend, this is just to give an idea of what we mean. What is a meal size? So when we say meals in our program, we're talking about an 8-ounce meal. So that's like the size and thickness of your hand. Or another way it's described sometimes like two decks of cards like stacked next to each other. I know that some people eat bigger meals, and that's okay. Like if you want to eat a 60, so if the advisory is for 4 meals a month and you want to eat a 16-ounce meal instead of an 8-ounce meal, then you would just do that twice a month instead of 4 times a month. And then the other information on here is about ways to prepare fish that can reduce your exposure to PCBs. Now, these tricks do not work for mercury because the mercury is actually in the muscle part of the fish. But for the PCBs, you can really reduce your exposure by cutting off the fatty parts of the fish, which is like under the skin, along the belly flap there, and especially the especially the innards. Like I know that there are some cultures that like to eat more of the fish, more parts of the fish. But there is a lot more fat in the internal organs of a fish. So that is where a lot of the PCBs are. Okay, so all of that was review of like what is already out there for fish advisories, and we are working on new materials to kind of get the word out again, because it's been out so long. I think a lot of people don't know about it, even though it's been there a long time. So next slide, please. So this is going back to Toby's talk. So these are figures I borrowed from him, actually. And so the dots on these maps are the same dots that he was talking about. Those are like locations of the receivers that he used in his tracking study to track the movement of bass. And this is just to sort of show that, we have always just sort of assumed that, we at OHA, I mean, have kind of assumed that the fish were kind of staying in the area around the dam. And so that's why we had our boundaries for that advisory just a mile upriver from the dam. But like Toby showed, like there were quite a few fish in his study, a pretty high percentage that at least at some time left that area either upstream or downstream. And because of that, that raised questions for us about like, well, what does that mean about the boundaries for our current fish advisory? Does it mean we need to move the boundaries? And what additional information would we need if we wanted to do that? So if you go to the next slide, please. So these are kind of the possibilities that we can see, and we have not settled on one of these yet. Like we are right in the middle of talking about these three options, and which one we should do. So one option, of course, is to leave the boundaries where they are. Another option is to move the boundaries without more sampling, and that would be, I guess, it would be based on some of Toby's work. Like if we could figure out some way to work out percentages of fish and how far they moved, and I'm not sure how to do that. We would need to find some expert help to figure out how we would do that. Another option would be to conduct more fish tissue sampling, and then possibly move the boundary, and that sampling predominantly outside of the current advisory area, so we can get a better idea of how that fish movement affects the frequency of fish up and downstream that have higher contaminant levels from the Bradford Island area. So, and then depending on the results of that sampling, maybe those results would say we should move the boundary, and maybe they would say we should leave them where they are. One additional piece of information I should give you too is that back in 2011, there were also fish collected at Cascade Locks. And so that's further upstream. And those fish from Cascade Locks, the average concentration was similar to the rest of the fish for that advisory that goes all the way up to McNary Dam. So we feel okay. We feel more okay about upstream because we have those fish data from Cascade Locks. And we have other fish tissue data from upriver, but we feel less certain about downstream because we especially thought that the dam was going to be a barrier to fish moving downstream and coming back up. So I think the downstream is what surprised us the most. And we don't really have any fish tissue data from downstream of the dam, especially not in like the main stem of the Columbia River. So that's probably the biggest question mark for us. So like I said, we have not decided on one of these courses of action. Like we're right in the middle of talking about it internally and also with our partners. We have started looking into options that might exist to get more fish tissue sampling. And we're, like I say, you've sort of caught us like right in the middle of that process. And it was Toby's work that prompted this. Like we saw the information that he just showed you, and that's why we're thinking about this. If you can go to, I think I've got one more slide and then the questions. So the reason, one way to approach this type of uncertainty would be to just have expand the boundaries like very large, like, as far as Toby detected any fish, then that's how far the boundaries of the advisory should move. And the reason that we hesitate to do that is because there are a lot of health benefits to eating fish, and it's a really important food source for a lot of people, for tribes especially, but lots of other people too. There are a lot of people who really depend on fish as a food source, and it's a pretty generally, there are a lot of health benefits. So always in the fish advisory program, we're trying to balance the risk from contaminants in fish against the benefits of the health benefits of eating fish. So we really don't want to be any more restrictive than we have to be when we're developing our advisory. So that's why we would hesitate to just make like a huge expansion to the boundary unless we had some more data to really justify it, or to show us that that's really necessary to protect health. So I think that's my last like substance slide, and the rest is just for Q&A. And I can take questions for me, and I think Toby's still here to take questions for his study too. And we've been talking with Toby a lot, so and appreciate his expertise as we've had these kind of conversations.
Yeah, Toby and David, thank you so much. I'll go ahead and open it up for any RAB members' questions or comments they have.
Yeah, this is Carl. I have a couple of questions. The contaminants at issue, the rationale for the reason for the advisories, it's PCBs, right?
Yeah, it's PCBs. Especially in the Bonneville Dam advisory, that's very close to the dam, the small one, that's the do not eat advisory. For the larger advisory, the Middle Columbia, it's kind of equal parts PCBs and mercury, because both PCBs and mercury were kind of contributing equally to the risk upstream once you get up further from the dam.
Okay, and I wonder nowadays, are you looking at, you talked about potentially doing more tissue sampling. Are you looking at the presence of PFASs?
That's a good question. We have one advisory in Oregon that is partly due to PFAS, PFAS in particular. Yeah, I think we're a little early still in our conversations. Like right now, we're in the phase of like figuring out funding. Like how would we, like where would we get the money to do this additional sampling? So, but once we have that in place, then I think we would be talking about that whole analyte list, like what analytes to test for. At a minimum, I think it would be PCBs and mercury, and then other add-ins as we're able. I should also clarify that OHA, we're not the ones that actually do fish tissue sampling. Like we would rely on partners like DEQ to actually do the fish tissue sampling. They would help us develop the sampling plan. We're kind of like the end users of the data. So we would tell them, this is the kind of data we need. And then we would work with them. They would develop the actual sampling plan and go do it to get the data.
Thank you.
I see Kate has her hand up.
Okay, I'm going to surprise everyone that I have a number of questions. Want to make space for others who have questions, so encourage folks to raise their hands. If I'm going on too long, tell me to stop. But I have a couple of questions. First, I guess maybe David, as far as the fish tissue samples from Cascade Locks that you're basing the assumptions on about like the safety of the fish there, do you know how recent that data set is for those?
That was from the same collection effort as the original, like 2011 sampling effort. That was the same data that we used to issue the advisory at Bonneville Dam.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that data from Cascade Locks is 15 years older than the year, or 13 years older than the data we're looking at now from the smallmouth bass. Is that accurate?
Right. And we're looking at the 2020 PCB data for bass in the 4-bay in our other work. Like we'll update the advisory as necessary, as warranted by those data, but that's still in the process with our public health assessment.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And then another question for you, David, is can you speak at all to whether or not smallmouth bass is a good proxy for implications for other fish species that are on the fish advisory traveling outside of the current 1 mile boundary?
Actually, I feel like that might be a better question for Toby. Like,
Okay.
like we know, once we know how much contaminants are in a species of fish, we know how to calculate the meal recommendation, but we're not like fish biologists. So I think that's a good question for Toby, actually.
Okay, great. You're off the hook, David.
And I would just say, I mean, not having data to be able to support this, it's a little bit of speculation, but certainly I think species like walleye and catfish are likely to exhibit very similar behavior patterns to smallmouth bass. So, you know, I think you could lump a few species like that in there that probably fall in the same category. As far as, you know, getting back upstream through Bonneville Dam, that's, you know, can't say much there. You know, we'd have to have tags and fish to be able to confirm that one way or the other.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Just for Toby, for transparency purposes for everybody, so it's my understanding that this study was the Army Corps wrote the work plan for the study. Is that correct?
Yes, they developed. Yeah, they developed our tasks. That's correct.
Okay, and can you speak a little bit about the original objectives for the study, like how it got initiated and whether or not the results were a surprise, or like I'm just kind of curious, like what prompted the study and what you were expecting to find versus what you found?
Yeah, so I mean, I think in general, they, you know, when they reached out, they wanted us to do a telemetry study to understand how smallmouth bass move around the forebay of Bonneville Dam. You know, they wanted to get some insights into what that behavior looked like. And I don't know, I don't know that anybody was super surprised with the 2020 results. I mean, I think, you know, we certainly recommended kind of having, you know, knowing a lot about smallmouth bass in a lot of other places after 2020. One of our recommendations was if we do this in the future, we'd recommend having the gates, you know, substantial distances upstream and downstream. And so, again, I don't think the detections that we got at those gates were particularly surprising. I was surprised that, you know, fish, smallmouth bass, more than one, you know, made it back upstream through Bonneville. I think that was a surprise, but, you know, the moving 5, 10, 15 miles for a smallmouth bass, I don't think that was, you know, anything new, particularly when you look at some of the studies that I showed there at the end of my presentation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And who funded the study? Was that also funded by the Army Corps, or was that funded by?
Yes, the Corps of Engineers.
Okay. And then can you talk a little, for folks who may or may not know about this, can you talk a little bit about like PCB testing? This is to you or David. PCB testing and how many different types of PCBs there are, and, you know, kind of the full versus partial congener sets, and when you do a full versus partial, and what we're actually like what we can actually understand if you're only doing a partial versus a full. Anybody who can speak a little bit to that would be helpful. And PCBs, yeah, are polychlorinated biphenyls for new folks.
Right. I can start with like, so like I said, we're sort of like end users of this kind of data. So what we prefer when we're to make a fish consumption advisory is to have, so polychlorinated biphenyls is a class of chemicals, a large class, and and it depends on how many chlorine molecules are on this kind of these organic rings. And so there are 209 different congeners, it's called. So depending on which chlorines are where, you can have up to, there's 209 combinations possible. And so when we're doing fish advisory work, our preference is to have fish tissue data where all 209 congeners are analyzed. That's what kind of that's what we apply the toxicity reference values to when we're calculating. So that's our preference to receive. I don't know, but again, like I say, OHA, we're not the ones that actually do the sampling. So I can't speak to when or why you would do less than 209.
Thank you. My last thing is just maybe a comment more than a question, is that I know we spoke about this earlier. I think a lot of us were caught off guard by this study being released, and none of us knew about it until someone kind of caught that it had been published. And so I wonder if there might be some sort of way we could, I don't know, I think there's not any studies planned at the moment, but it would be great to have some sort of protocol that if there's any study related to this area, to have any parties involved in cleanup be notified when any of those study results are published. Yeah, thank you both for your presentations and your patience with me while I pick your brains. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for those questions, Kate. I'll just briefly mention that the Corps doesn't have any similar studies planned in the horizon, but anything that we would conduct for the purpose of the CERCLA project would certainly be, we would be, oh, sorry, I have a little furry distraction here. Anyway, any studies that we would implement for the CERCLA project, we would definitely go through our regular process of reviewing with our interested parties, our regulators. We would, talk through results at forums such as these. Okay, so I'm gonna move on ahead. I saw that the next person with their hand up was
Megan. Oh yeah, you have a couple of hands raised.
Yeah, that's all I was gonna say.
Yeah. I was just about to move on to those. I see two hands up. I did see Laura's hand up first, so I'm gonna open it up to Laura for any questions, comments that you have.
Thanks. I had a question for USGS. If OHA or DEQ or someone were able to find the funding to do to collect fish downstream of the dam or even upstream, the telemetry study that you did, is it more, especially as you go to the 5, 10, and 15 kilometer distances out, does it provide any information on where fish are tending to spend time? Or is it more of a, just here's the gates and we know they traveled at least this far?
Yeah, so that's a super question. So these receivers, the bubbles that I had on the map there, the 15 and the 4B, those have a detection range of about, depending on the water velocity and everything, about 300 or 400 meters. And so you can imagine these detection bubbles out in the river. And so the information that you can get, basically depends on how dense your array is. And so if you imagine the array that we had in the 4B, if you had that, extending upstream and downstream of the dam several miles, you could certainly get a lot of information about how much time fish are spending, farther and farther away from the dam or within the bigger study area. Obviously, that kind of effort gets to be pretty expensive just in terms of buying, deploying, and operating the equipment. So it just gets back to kind of the scale of, really what the question is and what are you trying to address with the study.
If you were trying to design a study to help understand if the fish that are leaving, that have resided in the 4B where the contamination is and are leaving and going upstream or downstream, would you advise another telemetry study, or could just information on fish behavior known by the local fish biologists kind of be able to inform and predict where fish might be spending time instead of a more expensive telemetry study, which would be more advisable in this situation if they were to design a study?
Yeah, that's a super good question. I mean, there's a lot of literature out there, you know, studies that show similar results to what I showed at the end of my presentation. And so, you know, from those studies, I think you could kind of start to bracket, you know, we might expect fish to go this far upstream or this far downstream, you know, to try to understand that. Where it gets a little bit tricky is, you know, when you have tributaries and things that enter, for example, we know in the Yakima River, the Yakima gets a big pulse of smallmouth bass every year from the Columbia. And so, but, you know, the questions related to that, we don't know how far upstream those fish move every year. And so, you know, I think the literature search is certainly useful. But, you know, ultimately, you probably, if you have really, you know, specific questions, what tributary are fish going to, or specifically where are they going? For example, in the Bonneville Pool, how much time are they spending there? I mean, it's ultimately, it would have to be some kind of telemetry study, I think. But you're certainly right, you know, that a study of that magnitude would be expensive, for sure.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Okay. Next person I saw had their hand up is Jeff, our Office of Counsel at the Corps. Jeff, go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Megan. I just wanted to clarify for those, for RAB members and any members of the general public, that USACE in its lead agency capacity, USACE is funding and performing the cleanup. And as the agency evaluates data gaps and other investigation phase tasks or activities that will fill data gaps or help better understand nature and extent of contamination, it's not unusual for a federal agency like USACE in this position to rely on private environmental consultants. We've, of course, awarded a contract to Jacobs, who is helping us with some tasks. And, you know, there's also situations where federal agencies and federal resource agencies may have particularly helpful subject matter expertise that informs investigation, the investigation phase, and any supplemental remedial investigation report. And so, you know, we, USACE, will, we basically place an order with USGS to provide us that type of expertise and an expert report that informs our cleanup going forward. So that's kind of the how we got here on a higher level.
Thanks for that comment, Jeff. I do want to add one quick clarification on the back end of that. While we do, of course, have lots of information from USGS's studies, they don't change the plan for the cleanup right now. I can probably talk a long time on that, but I just wanted to provide that quick clarification. And I see one additional hand up. I'll turn it over to Juan.
Thank you so much. I'm new here. I'm Juan Monge, Washington resident, but also an immigrant Latino. About the new study about Bradford Island, the new data, I'm concerned, that can, can be for public, but also in a language that all the community can understand the new data coming from the new study. Especially with Latino, especially with Latino community that they like to fish, go fishing over there, in the Columbia River.
I can speak just to our fish advisory materials we have in a lot of different languages, definitely including Spanish and all the ones on the sign on the top of the sign here, plus more, I think, are available. So Are there more available? I can't remember which one.
There are more
but
available.
yeah,
I also can't remember the exact number of languages it is available in, but
I believe it's 11 for like the handouts, but on the sign, the physical signs out on the river, that's like the top 4.
Right. I think it's the top 4 top 4 of communities that we know of that like do the most fishing up there.
But I know with kind of I think there's 11 total for the other handouts.
That sounds right to me.
Yeah. And the QR code that's at the bottom of the sign shown on the screen now leads to additional languages for that sign. Or for the fish advisory, I should say, in general.
Can I jump in and ask? I'm not sure if one was referring to the fish advisory or the new study. And Toby, is there a Spanish version available of the study?
Yeah, the new study is in Spanish, also in another language. Yeah, thank you.
No, not that I'm aware of. I can look into that and reply, but not that I'm aware of. It's a really good question.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that question, Juan. Appreciate it. I see that Laura has her hand up.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, you know, while we're so grateful that OHA is exploring options for trying to find funding and ways to partner to get additional fish tissue data on contaminant concentrations down, especially downstream, and will help support those efforts. We feel that this is a failure of the Corps' duties to investigate the extent of the site and be responsible for risks that this site has produced.
No, I understood, Laura, that's definitely the concern. I would say for the Corps' perspective, where we're at now is we're trying to focus on the data collection that moves us through the CERCLA process. And while we, you know, it's identified that you know, that pathway is a risk, you know, the Corps' position at this point is that, you know, collecting additional fish tissue doesn't help us, you know, select and determine the remedial alternatives. So, you know, we're thankful for, you know, EPA has some grant options for OHA and the state and other interested parties to take advantage of to help get that data. But I do understand the criticism more.
Thanks. I'll just say we were looking into that EJ grant today, and it doesn't look to me that states are eligible for it. And so we have a list of questions that we're trying to compile to send to the email that's available, but trying to understand who can apply and under what situations. And it definitely sounds like a community-based organization is needed to co-apply. I don't know that a RAB could be that entity because the Corps is on it. But so it looks like a local government, not a state government, a tribe, a university, and a community-based organization are the possible applicants for something like that. So we're just trying to understand all that better.
Hey, Laura, this is Rich Francis, EPA. Yeah, let us follow up with you on that. It was my understanding that there were multiple grants, not just EJ grants, but there are also other grants that we could apply or that could be applied for. And that there are, you know, we were kind of directing everyone to these, I think they're called Tic Tags or TikToks, to help guide people through the process. But let's definitely look into that and get back to you on which agencies can apply for that.
Thanks.
Okay.
If I could jump in, Megan, I just, for folks who are new, I just want to reiterate like the real major concern and kind of like daily public health exposure that is presented disproportionately to tribal fishers and subsistence fishers who, even by the Mid-Columbia Fish Advisory standards, eat generally much more fish than the advised healthy standard. So, it seems like we have, new folks here tonight, and I just wanted to let folks know that that's one of the big concerns for this particular site. It's a usual and accustomed fishing area for a number of tribes, and there are lots of fishing platforms there and folks who are getting exposed every day. So that's why we're digging in so much to this and trying to get more data. Thanks.
Thanks for that comment, Kate. And thanks for your comments as well, Laura. At this time, I don't see additional hands or entries in the meeting chat, but I just want to open it up for any additional comments or questions. Okay, I'm not seeing any additional comments and not hearing anyone come off mute to speak. So at this point, that brings us to the end of our agenda. I'd like to thank everyone for presenting today. Thank you very much, David and Toby, and thanks everyone for their very insightful questions and comments. Always appreciated, and a great meeting today. At this time, do we have a motion to conclude the meeting?
This is Andrea. I'll make a motion to conclude the meeting.
I'll second.
All right, thank you very much. The meeting is now closed. Appreciate everyone's time and attention tonight.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank
everyone.
you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.